We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth with FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, Wednesday, August 5th, 2026. And today we're going to talk about how some former government officials are finally admitting about the origin of the coronavirus coming from a biolab in Wuhan, China. Senate Republicans want Biden-level spending, DEI, and lots of baby murder. Flock is teaching police officers around the country how to pitch and sell its product to their towns. And an FBI agent was just arrested for stealing $1 million worth of cryptocurrency. So let's get after it. I keep having to go back to it, guys. I keep having to dig into everything that is professional wrestling. My youngest son has been into it for about a year now. I tried to get on board so it would have something that he and I could do together. And there is no shortage of material if you happen to have Netflix. I mean, they have the archives going back into the 80s. It's amazing how much stuff they actually have there. But the reason that I like wrestling for him is that he doesn't know it's kayfabe. He still believes that it's actually true. He thinks that the outcomes are not scripted. He is genuinely surprised. He does not know that they have a predetermined result ahead of time. Now, I'm going to keep that thing going as long as I can. It's one of the most endearing things in my life right now. That fundamental belief, that trust in what he is watching is actually what he is watching. I don't want to cancel Christmas. This is like on par with telling kids that Santa Claus doesn't exist. I want to keep it going because it is pure. Call it naivete, whatever you want to. It's amazing. And I want to have that experience for him be as extended as possible, at least until it gets really weird. Now, I want that because over the last 4 years, definitely had my trust broken. Actually, over the last 6 years, I think we all sort of have, starting really in 2020 when we were told, stay home, stay safe. Don't go to your non-essential job that you use to feed your family, pay your mortgage, because there's an upper respiratory infection that is out there. And that's really when the scales fell away from lots of our eyes, mine in particular. But to a more specific experience, I mean, coming forward with a reasonable concern, waste, fraud, abuse, risk to public safety, violation of rule, policy, procedure, law, or the Constitution itself, like whistleblowers do. My boss completely let me down. My coworkers, people who I counted as my friends, shunned me. The guy who came to my wedding as one of my groomsmen never spoke to me again. One of my best friends at the FBI Academy, he and I stayed in constant contact with each other. Couldn't help but notice I haven't gotten a Christmas card. People who I worked with and then had retired and gone on to other endeavors. I reached out to them to find out what would they recommend that I do. And then they all just happened to lose my phone number. Trust was completely shattered. And really, what is trust based on? Do what you say, be consistent, and admit your mistakes. It's pretty simple. It's not easy. I want to talk a lot about broken trust today. All the news stuff that I have arranged is all kind of centering on that idea. And really, the way I got on it, to go back to 2020, to go back to all things coronavirus, they all seem to spin off of that one, was this very interesting opinion piece or op-ed or Substack. I don't know what you would call it. I guess it's called the off-guardian.org. It comes from this psychotherapist out of Canada. I think it's worth actually reading into it a little bit. His name is Todd Hayen. And the title of this piece is called I No Longer Trust Anyone. And it's all about coronavirus. He talks about the American Wild West. Back then, almost every man who wanted to stay alive carried a revolver on his hip. The sheep of that era didn't last long. The difference is the wolves don't need to hide behind a bandana anymore, unless they're wearing a N95 mask. They wear white coats or sit in glass offices or smile at you from a television screen while they tell you what you need to do for your own good. And the sheep types, they didn't just follow along during COVID. A lot of them became enthusiastic enforcers because authorities gave them permission to be cruel. That's the breakdown of the way society tends to work. You hear about this all the time in military context, law enforcement context, anything in first responder. There's the sheep, there's the wolves, and there's the sheepdog. And you're told if you're a cop, you're a sheepdog. You have all the features of the wolf, but you have integrity. You have a moral compass. You follow the standards. There's guardrails in place so you don't bite the sheep and get that taste of blood in your mouth. We have that. It's called the Constitution of the United States. And we set up laws in order to do that, and policies and procedures. And if you think that maybe one of the sheepdogs in your pack might be getting out of line, or maybe there's a policy in place that is overstepping those guardrails, you are duty bound and compelled to come forward and you will be protected. You're not, but that's what you're told. And then the sheep themselves, where coronavirus kind of broke my outlook, shattered the trust that I have in my fellow man the most, was just how eagerly people became empowered, allowed themselves to not just imbibe the propaganda, and that's not really their fault. It was a psyop for over a year, constant stream of information that was false, completely lying about the origins of a Wuhan, China, where had a biolab that was studying bat coronaviruses, but it couldn't possibly be that. Instead, it was a bat that flew 600 miles without landing and then barfed into a stew, and that started a worldwide pandemic. And if you said, well, there's a biolab there that's run by a bioweapons expert from the Chinese government, that seems to me to make a little more sense. Well, then you were censored. And people imbibed that and accepted it, and maybe for good reasons or not, but I think a lot of people went along with it because it was the easy course, and it also afforded them the opportunity to gain a little bit of power. A little bit of power could be calling you out for not wearing a face mask. All those Karens that were out there, all those mask holes, those Branch Covidians. You had demands that you have a passport that certified that you had gotten the experimental gene juice into your arm. Otherwise, yes, you had the mark of the beast. You couldn't engage in commerce. We had neighbors who reported on neighbors. They said, hey, there's normally 2 vehicles in that driveway, but we see 4 or 5. We think they're having an unauthorized gathering inside their own house. We let children lose a year, 2 years, sometimes more, of learning. They had to stay home and do Zoom school. We let the elderly die alone. You don't want grandma to have any of her family around her. I mean, sure, she's about to check out from cancer, but what if she catches coronavirus while she's in there? We were silenced. We were censored. They called us killers. They said, when I say they, the sheep in this case, and to a large extent, the wolves who were on TV, the medical professions, the government officials, they said that we should have our children taken away from us. We should be locked in concentration camps. I think the number is like 25%. I used to have the image. I don't have it anymore. Maybe I'll pull it back up for another episode. It's 25% of Republican voters. Republicans, small r Republican, small government party. They said that people who did not get the coronavirus should be in a internment camp. 1 in 4 Republicans said that. That's where trust went out the window. And trust is earned. It's over a course of actions. You have to be consistent. You have to do what you say you're going to do. And you also have to admit when you err. And we haven't seen a whole lot of admissions. Instead, we're getting amnesia. We don't want to think about it, Steve, anymore. Let's just move on. Let's seek amnesty. We don't want accountability. That's a painful time. Let's just pretend it never happened. And that will never pass muster for me, and probably for you if you happen to be joining us today. But we have actually gotten a couple of little nuggets, a little teeny tiny bit of people who told us that we had to trust the science, trust the experts. And now they're trying to pivot and course correct and pretend that they didn't do anything wrong along the way. The first one comes from CNN. This is a former coronavirus czar. They called him the COVID czar under the Joe Biden autopen administration. He's saying, well, it might not have been that wet market in Wuhan.
And before I let you go, you reshared a tweet that said, among other things, the available evidence overwhelmingly does not show that let me say it this way. You said that the available evidence points towards research-related incidents in Wuhan as the origin of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that we were funding research in an institution where we lacked full transparency into what research was being conducted. You agreed with that?
I did. This is going to surprise some people. You know, when I went into the White House, my view was this was almost surely a natural outbreak, maybe a lab leak. Based on information I learned and based on information I've seen, I have come to conclude that it is more likely to have been a lab leak. Here's the bottom line. No one in the United States knows for sure. The only people who know for sure are officials in China, and we still need transparency and accountability.
We need transparency and accountability from China, not from the likes of him, who went into the White House and was really, really assured that it was definitely the bat that flew 600 miles. Nobody knows for sure, unless you have a triple-digit IQ and common sense and can analyze information and not be swept up in all the propaganda the likes of the Dana Bashes of the world at CNN were giving you for nigh on a year. Dana Bash is so humiliated that she can barely utter a sentence. She's staggered. It's as if she can't read the teleprompter in front of her. It's as if she has forgotten how to read, like one of the kids who were in my son's class when he finished up kindergarten, when he got the dispensation. Even though you didn't finish up kindergarten, we're going to promote you on to the first grade. And then he went back. He was told, you have to come back. You have to come back a little bit early because you missed key instruction. So as a school where you're entering the first grade and you're going to matriculate up to the fifth grade, we're going to, as a school district, say we're going to bring back the first graders and the third graders and the fifth graders for 2 weeks early. And actually, we'll bring them in for half the day. So half the kids will come in for half the day and half the other kids will come in for the second half of the day. So I'm looking back because I can analyze numbers and be like, oh, okay, so half the kids for half the day. So a quarter of the kids for 2 weeks. So they're trying to say that they can have another outbreak and then shut down the schools, tracking with you. And then when my son came out after his first day of getting key instruction, and I asked him what he had learned that day, he said, well, most of my friends forgot how to read and how to count. So we had to learn how to count to 10 again. And then we learned a song about staying 6 feet apart. He went to Catholic school the next day. No trust in anybody from the media, no trust in anybody from the scientific community. It's been completely shattered. What about government actors? What about principals within both administrations? The Biden administration at that point, the coronavirus czar. How about the Trump Part 1 administration? How about the guy who was a heartbeat away from the presidency? This is Mike Pence.
The country. But, you know, what was most troubling to me was I lost count of the number of times in the Situation Room where I asked Dr. Fauci if it might be possible that this came from a lab leak in Wuhan. And he assured me over and over again, even with other virologists at the table taking a different view, that it couldn't have come from a lab.
Do you think he lied to you?
I don't know what the source of it was. I wrote about it in my book about 4 years ago that I always suspected that it came from a lab. I'm troubled by the fact that we haven't, to this day, held China accountable for a virus that cost the lives of millions of people around the world.
There he is again. Same thing. We got to have accountability. Not for me, for China. Now, look, I'm not letting China off the hook. I think they unleashed a virus on the entire globe for their own purposes. But Mike Pence, he wants to say to you that he knew the whole time. I mean, he's really smart. He's got a furrowed brow. He probably wears pleated khakis. Really, really competent leader there. You wanted him to be in the room, in the Situation Room, making those key decisions. He had that suspicion all along, and he kept peppering Dr. Anthony Fauci with that question. Do you think it came from the wet market? And he can't take a strong stand, though, on saying, yeah, Fauci clearly lied to me the entire time, because that would make him look like a feckless, flaccid leader who didn't take the necessary steps of removing Anthony Fauci from his task force. And on top of that, he just trusted the experts, so he can evade all accountability entirely. You can read about it in his book, which I'm sure he's still collecting royalties from for the last 4 years. Now, let's pivot away from coronavirus, but we can stay on some government officials and we can stay on the Republicans because I want to talk about the budget bill that is moving its way on through the Senate at this time. So I have this piece from the Washington Post because Senate Republicans are in a rush. There are, after all, midterm elections. You saw that piece there with Mike Pence talking to Fox News and said in the lower right-hand corner that 92 days until the election. Well, I mean, voting is going to start, 15 minutes from now and extend for another 7 months until they get done counting them in California. But we're in that season. So what is on the agenda for the Republican Party? The party that controls the Senate, the House of Representatives, the Supreme Court, and the White House. Total control. Can't pass a budget, though. And they don't want to have a shutdown during an election year. That would bode very poorly for their prospects. So the Senate is in full-on panic. Let's go to the Washington Post because democracy dies in darkness, where the headline here says, Senate GOP rushes to pass budget bill, avoid shutdown ahead of midterms. Senate Republicans are racing to complete a lengthy to-do list before leaving town on Friday. I mean, they got to get home. They got to go do some campaigning. They wouldn't have to actually do their job throughout the entire month of August. Included in their to-do list is approving a stopgap spending bill, otherwise known as a continuing resolution. You know, that thing that Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, said we were done with? We were done with minibuses and omnibuses, continuing resolutions. No, they're going to do the exact same thing. It incorporates White House requests to maintain funding for housing and nutrition programs through the fall. Oh, so the Republican-controlled White House wants to maintain government funding? You mean government expenditure? You mean the government spending money that it steals? I mean taxes from you on things like food stamps and free housing? You know, those things that are in the invisible ink and the good and plenty clause in the back of the Declaration of Independence. Oh, wait, they're not there at all. And we're going to continue the funding at Joe Biden levels, because that's the conservative position at this point. And another thing they take note of here in this Washington Post piece, let me throw it up there again. Made sure to highlight this one. Additionally, it being the continuing resolution, would temporarily block the White House's Office of Management and Budget, which is overseen by Russell Vought, my former boss. So I'd like to see him actually struggle to do his job, but not in terms of this. Want to block OMB from adopting a rule that would give political appointees sweeping powers to cancel hundreds of billions of dollars in federal grants. So the Senate, controlled by the Republican Party, wants to stop the executive branch, not because it's usurping senatorial powers. They want to stop the executive branch, the president of the United States, or anyone that he delegates authority to in keeping with his oath of office, from stopping spending money that they steal from the American people. I mean tax, and just redistribute elsewhere, because they're saying what they're doing in order to allocate that money out there is somehow out of step with the policies, without a step with the laws. Let's get a little bit more specific, because we talked about this a little bit last week, and now we're getting some more details. What we talked about last week were actually grants that were coming out of the Department of Energy for quote unquote clean energy. And there were like 600 grants. It was in the billions of dollars. And what the Trump administration had done was they pulled the grants from 284 recipients. Now, 283 of them were in states that voted for Kamala Harris and had 2 Democrat senators. And the allegation was, it's political. And what did I say at the time? It could be. It might not be. Probably is, particularly when you have that high of a ratio, 283 out of 284, that makes sense. Or they could have just identified how that money was being laundered to some nonprofits that are out there doing get out the vote efforts, door knocking, and they're not really focusing on putting solar panels on roofs. And the way that you could avoid all of that scrutiny, avoid the congressional hearings that will undoubtedly appear after the midterm elections when there's a blue wave that comes on into power, would be to say, hey, we just canceled all the grants. Don't accuse us of being political. We're not using anybody's voting record against them as it comes to grants. We just think that grants are unconstitutional because it doesn't say them in the Constitution. So just stop stealing. I mean, taxing from the American people, and stop giving out that money, because clean energy is not in your prime directive federal government. That would make sense. But away from the clean energy, back to the grants that the Republicans in the Senate are insisting now continue. They were due to stop in October. They're now insisting, as part of this continuing resolution, which they weren't supposed to have anymore, they're actually going to have to keep shelling out money in the form of grants to other things as well. This comes from Zeal. Headline: Senate funding deal would block Trump grant reform until December. We're going to delay the stoppage. The stoppage was supposed to happen in October. It's actually going to extend it to December. The reform would prohibit, this is what was proposed. The White House wanted to do this, and the Senate is saying, nope, nope, and we won't pass a budget unless you refuse to do this. The reform would prohibit grant-funded activities involving diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender ideology, saying that if Harry can become a Sally, subjection of children to transgender drugs, we're going to cut off the twig and berries of healthy boys and breast tissue of healthy girls. Illegal immigration, we're just going to let that amnesty on through. Voter registration campaigns, I told you, get out the vote. And unrelated political advocacy, which you're not supposed to get taxpayer dollars for in order to do whatever political aims that you have. The American people should not have their money stolen. I mean taxed, so that one particular political party can then launder it to themselves in order to do their political activity. And the Republicans in the Senate are saying, no, that's got to continue. By the way, vote for us this fall. We're the party of small government. We're the party that's against communists. And leading this effort actually is Susan Collins. Susan Collins, you know, that stalwart Republican, that stalwart conservative out of Maine, the one who sounds like Jimmy Stewart when she talks because she's 180 years old. Yeah, she's leading the effort. It would make costs associated with elective abortions ineligible for reimbursement unless expressly authorized by law. So, government-funded baby murder. Well done, everybody. Thank you very much, Republicans. Thank you very much, senators. Thank you very much, coronavirus czars. Thank you very much, media out there. Now we know why our trust is completely shattered. All right, I want to now pivot over to some flock camera stuff because we're going to do a deep dive in that in a second, guys. But before we do, let's remind you, if you haven't already, give us a nice thumbs up and a follow if you happen to be watching the live show on YouTube and Rumble every weekday, noontime Eastern. Find us here at AmRadPod. And if you missed the show or you just want to catch up, you want to recommend it to a friend, please head over to the Spotify channel, which is also at AmRadPod. And that will drop not live, but lively around 1 o'clock Eastern time. And it's really just after we get done on the live show on Rumble and YouTube. And as a reminder, not as a reminder, as a correction, I can't read a calendar, guys. I said the last couple of days that next week we're doing the commingled show with Keith Malinak. My bad. It's the following week, August 17th. The week of August 17th, that week, there will be a joint program from 7 a.m. to 9 a.m. Eastern time between the American Radicals podcast and At the Mic, which will come to you on the same channel here, AmRadPod. So be in tune for that one. It's not next week. It's the following week. There's your head up for it. And I will schedule the advertisement to run now. Let's go into some block camera stuff. So I have an exclusive piece from the Washington Post, which kind of recounts a lot of the abuse that's gone on since these cameras have become so prolific around the country. And then also got access to some PDF documents that Flock is pushing out there to police officers to pitch it to their localities. Well, let's begin with the Washington Post exclusive. And a headline here is how rogue officers turned a nationwide camera network into a tool for stalking. Now, the link for this exclusive is in the show notes for today. It is a very long exclusive. They go into lots of different examples of the abuse that went on. If you're interested in that, you can read on through it because there is a legion of examples. But if you happen to be watching us here, YouTube, Rumble, flipping on over to Spotify, we're like 24 minutes into the show. You see the photo of the woman there. She is the prime victim who gets promoted throughout the piece here. They go really extensively into her experience. Her name is Marcy Bakley, and her stalker, his name was Michael Steffman. Michael Steffman is no longer with us. He killed himself. He was her ex-boyfriend. He was a police chief who worked only 15 miles away from her. And her experience was him just harassing her and stalking her and sending her messages saying, why are you here? Why are you going there? And are you going to visit this guy? And she didn't know what was going on. She felt really scared and nervous and confused. And finally she said, how do you know these things? And this dirtbag confessed and said, well, I'm following you on the flock cameras. And she didn't really understand what flock was at that point. And I think still a large portion of the country isn't really aware of it, but becoming more and more knowledgeable. And this guy who was this police chief, Steffman, he wound up getting arrested, cyber stalking, harassment, and he wound up killing himself, though, before he could actually be tried. But included within this piece from the Washington Post, I think are a couple of interesting points or noteworthy things that they say here. Authorities have charged or accused at least 50 law enforcement officers of using license plate readers for unauthorized purposes. Now, the majority of them are to stalk women. While some of the searches resulted in officers' firings or prosecutions and prison sentences, some police departments in other cases allowed officers to continue using the system even after receiving warnings that they were being misused. So just, slap on the wrist, you messed up, go back to work. Now, I guess you have to use some discretion. Maybe there is an articulable reason why a letter of censure or maybe a suspension or a dock and pay, whatever the sort of punishment that gets adjudicated out there, short of a termination and a prosecution, but they don't go into it in the Washington Post. Now, I was a police officer, uniformed. We didn't have flock cameras, but we did have access to databases, NCIC, JCIC, these databases where you could run people's names and find out if there was a want or a warrant for them, a criminal history. And there were laws in the books that said, hey, you can't just run this on anybody. There has to be a legitimate law enforcement purpose for that. You have to be involved in a situation where there's articulable, reasonable suspicion, probable cause in order for you to use this tool. And in fact, if you're caught abusing this tool, because you could use it on the radio and ask a dispatcher to do it. Or eventually, if you got certified, you could do it on your own computer. All that stuff was logged. It was subject to an audit. And if you abuse that tool, you could be charged with a felony. You could go to prison. You could be fined an astronomical amount of money that was certainly way more than you earned at that point in any given multiple years of salary. When I was married, my wife was saying, hey, can you run a background check on a potential babysitter? I said, no, I can't do that. That's illegal. I'm not going to risk jail time over it. Not to say it doesn't happen, but there's actually guardrails in place. Now with flock cameras, it's the new tool that's within law enforcement right now. There's these cameras that are all over the place. The Washington Post goes into just how proliferate it is in the country. There's over 120,000 cameras in the United States. 6,000 communities, 20 billion license plates are read every single month, 20 billion. And there's 140,000 active users. We hear all the time there's like 1 million law enforcement officers in this country. So 14% have access to the flock cameras. In April, the company rolled out a new voluntary audit assistance feature which agencies can use to enable and automatically scan officers' searches for suspicious activity. But it's voluntary, not required. And here's another problem. You can do the searches and then the audit could happen, but it's kind of random. Why don't you just assign a case number? Like, I understand that it's a voluntary thing, but wouldn't the best course of solution? I sound like Dana Bash here, but wouldn't the best way to make sure that we're doing things on the up and up be, well, you have a case number associated with a particular flock search that would, in the note section, articulate what your reasonable suspicion was or your probable cause in order to use the tool. And that feature is not there. And the last thing they say here again in this Washington Post exclusive, again, it's very long, but probably worth your time. Check out the link in the show notes today. Flock told agencies that it could set its own written rules for who can access the system and how it can be used, the company documents show. So Flock is hardly in a position of authority where they could say, this is how you have to use the tool. But I really want to zero in on that because Flock documents. It's a private entity. It's a private business trying to turn a profit, offering a product that people want, need, and desire. People being localities, municipalities, counties, police departments, sheriff's offices, which have access to the treasury because the government steals, I mean, taxes from you in order to finance what the government does. And I'm hardly an anarchist. We do have a place. We have a social compact with the citizen and the government in this country at the federal level, state level, local level. And the government is supposed to protect the citizens against fraud and force and do so within the confines of the Constitution. Now, does Flock circumvent personal privacy laws? That's ultimately what comes down to the question. And a lot of people are debating it now, and Flock is getting very nervous. They want to expand out their business interests. They have 120,000 cameras, 6,000 communities out there, but there's way, way more communities. I think there's like 18,000 communities is what Washington Post got into. So, I mean, their footprint is large, but they've way prefer to be triple the size that they are now. I mean, think of all that sweet government cash. So what is Flock now doing? Flock has generated new documents to essentially deputize police officers, law enforcement officers in these various districts, which are weighing and measuring and considering whether or not to use Flock cameras. And so Flock is giving some coaching to the police officers, telling them what to do. And there's a PDF that 404 Media put out, and we don't have to go into their link, but we can go actually into the PDF, which I read. It's not too long. I think it's it's only like 14 pages, but there are some excerpts that I want to dig into here because they are very disturbing here. Now, the document starts, I mean, once you get through like, the table of contents and all that sort of stuff, I want to go to page 3. Page 3. A few years ago, agencies introducing a new technology program were primarily asked whether it worked. New concerns today: who has access? How is technology governed? And are there safeguards working? All right, that's a reasonable way to present this. There's a new tool. It's the new hotness. We're going to use it. But is it maybe getting outside of the guardrails? Is this a situation where the sheepdogs might be able to become the wolves? Who's policing the police? What are the guardrails? Are we violating people's liberties? These are reasonable questions that reasonable people can present and ask to make sure that we're doing the job of protection against fraud and force, but we're not overstepping the bounds. Law enforcement's not supposed to be easy. It's supposed to be hard in a country that pretends to be allegedly free. Well, here's Flock digging deeper into this because, they're really mega Doppler concerned about it, which is why they say things like trust is now part of the job. And they have a picture of a female officer there keying up her microphone. Trust is part of the job until you get to page 5. Page 5. If you do not tell the story of your program, someone else will. Opponents have a very carefully scripted narrative. You should also have a carefully scripted presentation. The you in this case would be the police officers who are being deputized by Flock to go and hawk this product. Okay? So the statement is, if you don't tell the story of your program, someone else will. Opponents, people are saying, hey, I have some constitutional liberties, like a Fourth Amendment against illegal search and seizure, some privacy concerns, and they're going to paint our product as being fundamentally evil, something that's objectively bad. We can't let that happen. We're going to have to get out ahead of this and message. So now we've devolved from actually answering the questions of who has access to it. Is there oversight? How is this governed? To let's just spin. Let's play the PR game and see if we can score enough points that will overcome people's reasonable concerns here. So what do they encourage the police officers to do? Well, they should go and brief their city managers early, like before they have an opportunity to hear the counter arguments. We won't want them to make an informed decision, after all. They should also meet with council members before they vote. In Florida, we have sunshine laws. I don't know if that's being used here because that's illegal. If this is a pitch for a product, the council members are supposed to have that pitch made in front of them, which is a public forum. So people who are citizens have the opportunity to see what is being presented to the decision makers, and they can be held accountable. But Flock doesn't really care about sunshine laws. They don't really care about transparency. They just want their product to go out there. Now let's go down to page 6. And this page is entitled, what is this? Moving the conversation from surveillance to governance. We don't want to answer the question about governance that was posed reasonably. We want to talk about something different. We want to talk about, we'll go from illegal surveillance to how it's actually oversaw. One of the most common questions agency hears today is whether license plate recognition technology constitutes mass surveillance, an absolutely reasonable question in the alleged land of the free. But Flock wants to take a different approach. Don't debate terminology. They don't want the police officers to actually answer whether or not this would constitute a Fourth Amendment violation. That's just semantics. I mean, do you care about gender affirming care, by the way? Or conversion therapy? Baby murder? Or is it just pro-choice? Reproductive justice? Don't debate semantics. Don't talk about the surveillance aspect to it. Focus on governance. Who has access? Who controls? Easier to answer your own questions. They're going to do the Zootopia thing where you get asked a tough question and you respond back by just not answering the question at all, but asking yourself a completely different question so you can filibuster for enough time. And typically this happens at a press conference where there's a strict sort of time limit until the wranglers can usher the media out of the room. Or if you happen to be on with Dana Bash and CNN and you don't want to answer a question that she probably didn't come up with, but one of the people on her staff did, and you say, well, I don't want to answer that one, but let me present a more friendly question for myself to set up the pin and knock it on down. Flock is actually asking them to do that. This was the lesson from that Pixar movie Zootopia. The fox tells the bunny that's how she can avoid any sort of scrutiny. Also, show how searches are tied to legitimate investigations. Well, I mean, if it saves just one life, if it solves just one crime, if it recovers just one stolen automobile, then we don't need to answer questions about violating individuals' privacy at all. Why are you concerned about that pesky, dusty document called the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? I mean, liberty. No, we need security. We'll head on down now to page 10. I'm almost through this whole thing, guys. Let me pull it up. The strongest budget arguments. So then they get into the actual financial commitment. And they don't want to talk about return on investment. I mean, why would a locality that steals, taxes money from its local populace in order to buy this product, why would they be concerned about being good stewards of the people's money? So the question's about costs. They said, hey, focus on outcomes instead. We're going to recover a bunch of stolen vehicles and missing persons, and we're going to save on overtime for cops, and we're going to clear cases. In fact, one recovered vehicle that's stolen would justify a camera. Reframe the debate from technology versus nothing to technology versus unsolved crime. So this is a false dichotomy. This is a straw man argument. They're saying, hey, as a town, we're debating whether or not we should have the tech or not have the tech. What are the pros and cons? And they're saying, no. That's not the ultimate question. We're going to do the Zootopia again. The ultimate question is, are we going to have the technology, or are we just not going to solve any crime ever again? Because apparently everybody in this town that's debating whether or not to use the flock cameras is Barney Fife. And you have an option of either having untold surveillance of your people at all times at the fingertips of some pervert who wants to interact with a woman who we happen to walk by at Walmart, and all crime is going to be ollie oxen free. That's what Flock wants to encourage to go on. Not what the tech costs. It's what is the cost of inaction. Now, couple final points before we go to some other pieces I have about Flock. I sort of had a look at this strategy a couple years ago. I went to Tennessee. We were trying to pass state legislation on through the assembly that was going to sort of put some speed bumps down between federal overreach and state law enforcement. And the thought was, hey, we're going to pass a law. And it's going to say that in the case that the sheriff nominates one of his deputies to go and work with the FBI, that the sheriff has to be read in on what his deputy is doing. Otherwise, the sheriff's not allowed to send his guy there. And that made sense. The sheriff's the chief law enforcement officer for a particular county. He's accountable to the people. They vote him in place. And you're telling me that one of his deputies gets on a joint terrorism task force. And then when the sheriff calls him up and goes, "Hey, deputy, what are you working on?" He goes, "Oh, sorry, you don't have a need to know, boss." That's not good. The sheriff should at least know. And if the sheriff disapproves of what his guy's working on, then he can pull him back. He can make the best call. He should be read into the file. And if the FBI is unwilling to do that for the Joint Terrorism Task Force, well, then I guess you just can't send your people. And that's a way that the locals can push back on the feds. Now, we got a lot of pushback from one particular group. That one particular group were the cops. They were the State Bureau of Investigations, the Homeland Department that was within Tennessee. And why were they pushing back? They wanted all that sweet, sweet government cash. They wanted all the goodies, the training and the tech, and especially the overtime, the golden handcuffs that are attached. The FBI is going to pay you the overtime, and you don't want to give up that sweet, sweet money. And then they got up there in uniform, dress uniform, not street uniform. These guys are normally rolling around in casual clothes. Nope, they were not their Class B uniforms. They're Class A uniforms with the clip-on ties. And they came in and said, nope, this law is no good. And what happened? The people said, well, we got to back the blue. The Republicans said, we got to back the blue. We're not worried about government overreach. The police officers are pitching it. And Flock knows that exact same thing. They're going to get that Class A uniform out there. They're going to have it starched shirts, probably looking even better than Mike Pence does in his pleated khakis. And the Republicans who are going to these town councils are going to say, got to back the blue no matter what, which has always been the bee in my bonnet. It's been something that I've never understood. How could you purport to be a conservative? How could you say that you believe in small government and then you just blindly trust the one particular department in government that has the ability to take away your freedom? No sort of oversight, no sort of scrutiny, but it works, it plays, and that's exactly what Flock is doing. And the final quote here from this PDF document from Flock says, trust is not built by avoiding difficult conversations. Trust is built by addressing them directly. Of course, if you listen to what Flock tells you to do as a law enforcement officer, you just don't answer those questions. You just ask yourself a completely different question and then say, well, unless you install a bunch of cameras here, then no crime will ever be solved again. And when you talk about installing some cameras and intruding on people's liberties, I have a video here that I want to get to because Flock cameras are getting installed not just on the roadways. No. I mean, they're trying to interdict crime. Well, what sorts of crime? I guess it's all through the outlook of whoever is making that decision, right? And in the case of this, if you exercise your Second Amendment, that makes you available to be surveilled.
So I decided to go to the gun range today, like an American, and tell me why there are Flock cameras pointing into the entrance of the parking lot, not the street, into the entrance so they can read every license plate that comes in here. Yeah, no, I love this. I'm sure there's no ulterior motive behind this either.
The first thing to confirm is that this is actually a Flock camera. You take a look at it here, you can compare it to Google. It's the exact same camera, so it is a Flock, so that's confirmed. The next thing that's important is the location. And if we go back in the video, there's a couple clues we can get of where this location is because you didn't post it. Right here, very quickly, you'll see a 2.5.
All right, we don't need to go into all the details there. This guy is verifying that those Flock cameras are indeed pointing directly at the entrance to a gun range, which is completely legal, not shady in the least. And that information is going to be collected by that local jurisdiction, that police force. They'll know the license plates of who likes to go and shoot guns. Wow. Let's just trust those officers there. And let's talk about one more thing about trusting officers. Now, FBI agents aren't first responders, but they do have a gun and a badge, so they get lumped into that area. Now, the premier preeminent law enforcement agency for the entire country. The Republicans in the Senate love to trust these guys, right? They give them $11 billion every single year. They represent the best amongst us. They would certainly never step outside those guardrails. They are the watchmen on the wall. They're the sheepdog to protect the sheep against all the wolves out there, protecting you against fraud and force, unless, of course, it comes to cryptocurrency, where we just had an FBI agent who stole $1 million worth of it. This comes from the Block Co. Headline: FBI agent accused of stealing $1 million in crypto allegedly turned to ChatGPT for vacation plans. He wasn't even a good criminal. All right, let's just read directly from this. This guy's name is Patrick Yaroch. Yankee Alpha Romeo Oscar Charlie Hotel. He was arrested Friday after allegedly confessing to stealing cryptocurrency beginning in late 2024 or early 2025. Yeah, he just did so much theft, he doesn't remember when it was. According to an affidavit filed August 1st, so it took them over a year to catch him, Yaroch said he discovered keys that allowed him to transfer funds from digital wallets to himself. He told investigators he was frustrated that he could not do more to prevent someone from an adversarial nation from using cryptocurrency and made about a dozen transfers. So this jerk, this colossal jackass, this thief used his position that he swore an oath. He swore an oath in order to obtain. It was an iPhone user agreement to him, but theoretically, he was supposed to be someone who was vetted at having integrity, and he was taking the oath for the right reasons. And then he has the temerity, the unmitigated gall, the hubris, the testicular fortitude to look at the investigators and say, well, I did it, but I really did it because we were not taking enough crypto away from China, so I had to do it. I had to find a way to do it, and then I effed up. I'm really, really mega Doppler sorry. Well, he didn't blow the whistle, so maybe he theoretically stands a chance of keeping his job if he happens to beat these charges. And then this guy went on ChatGPT and he started asking it whether or not he should use the money to leave the country and go on vacation with his family. No, probably more in line with leave the country because the walls were closing in on him. And then ChatGPT said, yeah, you should go to Portugal. And then he booked tickets to go to Portugal. Just for his background, Yaroch, he was a supervisory special agent. Oh, a manager, somebody who has a heightened level of scrutiny, somebody who you're supposed to trust more because they theoretically have their fingers on things like spending. They can take funds that are for a particular squad and use them to buy equipment or authorize travel. Yeah, this guy, he was a supervisor. He worked at FBI's headquarters in counterintelligence and espionage. Oh, like the CIA guy who had like $40 million of gold bars at his house. The FBI counterintelligence department, the whole arm there, which runs protection for itself, where people are taking bags of cash away. And then when they get investigated, the office of the inspector general just happens to, well, we couldn't adjudicate that. Actually, there's pressure to not bring charges or investigations on people who find themselves taking bribes from foreign nations. No, big surprise. He worked in counterintelligence. And before that, he worked in the Boston division. I'll have to ping George Hill to see if he knew this guy. He was fired July 31st, which would mean that a full 7 months after he was allegedly doing this thieving, he did lose his job. But again, he didn't wind up actually doing any whistleblowing, so we'll see if he's eligible to get his job back. All right, so we've reached the end, but I actually want to go back to the first piece that I no longer trust anyone. There is one more quote that I want to kind of close us out with on this one. Quote, you find out who's really with you when the pressure is on. You find out who's only ever along for the ride until it got inconvenient. The ones who stayed, those are my people now. The rest can go graze somewhere else. And I couldn't agree more. When the temperature got turned up and my coworkers who I thought were my friends just didn't want to talk to me anymore, there's a couple of them that are still out there. I try not to highlight that very often, but there are a few who are weighed and measured and actually pass the test. But for the most part, supervisors, co-workers, people who came to my wedding, guys who I went through an academy with, which is theoretically a forging experience. I mean, it's not like Navy SEALs buds, but you do get pepper sprayed in the face and you're away from your family for an extended period of time. It's not pleasant. You're supposed to have that lifelong bond and then can't get a Christmas card anymore. They went through it and they bent the knee and completely punked out. And I know a lot of people in the American Radicals podcast audience experience the exact same thing. Folks who said, ooh, you're not going to get that jab. You can't come to Thanksgiving dinner. You're not willing to put on 2 masks, well, I'm sorry, you can't come into this business. Who cares how long that we've been doing business with you? We don't want you here anymore. And then what we wound up doing was cutting down and making sure that your network, what it is actually full of people who are worth trusting. And in effect, that wound up probably being a positive thing because I'd rather have truth. I'd rather know who is worth trusting than just have some sort of blind hope that it is worth it at the end. All right, let's leave you though with a Bible verse here for the day that'll actually keep us in the total theme of the shattered trust that we've experienced over the last nigh on half decade. This comes from Psalm 146, verse 3. Do not put your trust in princes and human beings who cannot save. We had a gigantic letdown on coronavirus in our media, our medical community, our scientific community, our governments, our fellow citizens, and there's just no accountability coming. Nobody is going to pay the piper on it. They're going to have amnesty because they want to avoid all accountability. The Republicans, they aren't interested in small government. They're not interested in coronavirus accountability. And they're even wanting to include DEI and baby murder in their funding. That's at Joe Biden levels now. Flock cameras, you can't have liberty and security at the same time. It's an irreconcilable difference. You have to ultimately make the decision at a local level of what do you actually want? Do you want to live in a land of the free where we have a functional Fourth Amendment? Or do you want to give the ability of the state to look at you because you happen to go to a gun range and then say, well, we got to back the blue no matter what? Well, if we back the blue, you wind up empowering guys like FBI agents to steal millions of dollars in cryptocurrency and then justify it by saying, well, I had to do it. Otherwise, it was going to go to China. So wouldn't you prefer that I have it? No. So we have a shattered trust situation, guys. But the positive note, I guess, is if we go back to that, I no longer trust anyone, at least you know who you can trust at this point. We've been able to adjudicate it through one mechanism or another, and that actually is a positive thing to do. Surround yourself with those you're worth trusting, and then kick the dust off your sandals for the others. All right, guys, we'll plan to be back with you tomorrow here on the American Radicals podcast. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.